A metal tray slammed against the polished airport floor, the sharp clang slicing through the murmur of mourning travelers like a warning shot. Heads jerked up, conversations stalled, and in the frozen silence that followed, a single command, cut through the air with surgical precision: "Sir, step away from the counter. Now." Jonathan Reed didn't move at first. His breath hovered in his chest, slow and steady, as if his body refused to respond before his mind caught up. The order wasn't aimed at him, not exactly, but the circle of uniformed airport officers tightening around the ticket counter made it clear that someone had decided he was standing too close to something he shouldn't be. A middle-aged passenger in a windbreaker and baseball cap, red-faced, gripping a suitcase like a lifeline, jabbed a trembling finger in Jonathan's direction. "That's him," the man hissed. "That's the guy who slipped me the note." For a heartbeat, the world held still. Then everything detonated at once. Officers moved, radios crackled. The frightened man stumbled backward, palms lifted, as if awaiting impact. Jonathan blinked, once slow-controlled, forcing down the sudden burn of disbelief. He had just arrived at Atlanta's North Terminal to catch a flight to Seattle. He had spoken to no one, he had handed over nothing, yet now half the terminal watched him as though he were a threat waiting to explode. What struck him hardest wasn't the fear in the eyes staring back at him, it was how quickly a lie could mutate into truth in the hands of a stranger who needed anyone to blame. Officer Mendez, mid-40s, with eyes like steel, cooled in water, approached him with professional caution. "Sir, we need to speak with you. Step aside, please." His voice wasn't hostile, but it carried weight, the kind that came from long years cleaning up chaos caused by other people's assumptions. Jonathan saw the lines at the edges of the man's eyes, the tension in his shoulders, and he understood this officer wasn't looking for a fight. He was looking for clarity. Jonathan lifted his hands slowly, palms open. "Tell me what this is about." His tone was calm, controlled, clipped at the edges, but beneath it a cold question pressed tight in his chest. Who would try to pull him into something like this? And why, before Mendez could respond? The man in the windbreaker spoke again. His voice, a cooked mixture of panic and guilt. "He handed me a note near security. I didn't look at it. I didn't know what to do." His hands shook as he held out a crumpled scrap of paper. Officers leaned in. Cameras clicked. Someone whispered, "Is this another threat thing?" Jonathan's pulse hammered once hard, before settling into a steady rhythm. He watched Mendez accept the note, unfold it, and stare. The officer's brows drew together, not with alarm but confusion. Then something like annoyance. He turned the note toward Jonathan. One sentence, scrawled sharply. "You're being watched." Jonathan felt something inside him tighten, not fear, but recognition. That handwriting wasn't his. That phrase wasn't random. And that message was not meant for the stranger who received it. It was meant for Jonathan. And someone was trying very hard to make sure it reached him in the most destructive way possible. Mendez exhaled. "Sir, did you write this, numberer?" Jonathan didn't blink. "But I know what it refers to." He shouldn't have said that. The spark of interest in the officer's eyes proved it. But the truth had slipped out, pulled from somewhere deep in his gut, the place where secrets lived too long. The crowd pressed closer, hungry for spectacle. A woman in her 70s whispered to her husband, "He looks too calm for someone innocent." The old man tightened his hold on her arm, frowning. "Or he knows something we don't." Jonathan caught their eyes briefly, not with defensiveness, but quiet resolve. He had spent years learning how strangers judged what they saw before they questioned what they knew. He didn't resent them for it. He just refused to bow to it. While officers murmured among themselves, Jonathan's phone vibrated inside his coat pocket. Once, twice, 3 times. The pattern wasn't random. It was a code, a discreet alert used only by one person. Evelyn Shaw, former federal investigator, the only friend who knew the truth about the project he had built in silence for nearly 5 years. His hand stayed still. If he touched the phone now, half the bystanders would scream that he was triggering something. He lifted his chin, meeting Mendez's gaze, with a steadiness that felt carved from granite. "Officer, I can explain. But not here. And not in front of." He motioned subtly toward the cluster of phones filming him. All of them. Mendez hesitated. The officer behind him, a younger man with a jaw set too tight, stepped forward. "So we need your ID." Jonathan nodded. "Inside my coat pocket." The younger officer reached, retrieved the wallet, glanced at the ID, and froze. Something in his expression shifted. Respect, recognition. No. Something harder. Something troubled. He murmured to Mendez. "He's flagged." Jonathan didn't flinch, but his breath thinned. Flagged. So the message wasn't random. Someone had accessed a database that wasn't open to the public. Someone had marked him. Mendez cleared his throat. "Mr. Reed, for now, we just need to move to a private room. This doesn't mean you're in trouble. It means someone wants us to believe you are." That last sentence wasn't procedure. It was instinct. A woman with silver hair dressed in a navy wool coat suddenly stepped forward. Her voice was steady, her posture tall, her eyes sharp with the weight of a lifetime of reading people. "Officer, if you're taking that man away, you should know I saw him this morning. He didn't approach that passenger. The windbreaker man bumped into him, not the other way around. I thought it was an accident. But now it makes sense." Her name, as she later introduced herself, was Margaret Hollis. Retired judge. Nearly 4 decades on the bench. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She simply stated her memory like a verdict. It silenced the terminal. Even the guilty man swallowed hard. And Jonathan felt something shift in the air, subtle but undeniable. One witness with authority could undo chaos, or ignite it. Mendez nodded slowly. "Judge Hollis, I appreciate that. But the damage wasn't undone. The cameras were still rolling, the tension still rising, and somewhere beyond the security checkpoint, someone who knew exactly who Jonathan was and what he carried was waiting for him to be delayed." Jonathan exhaled once deep and grounded, as though steadying himself for the storm ahead. People saw him as calm, controlled. Some mistook it for arrogance, others for guilt. Only a handful ever recognized it for what it truly was. A man used to walking into rooms where no one understood the size of the truth he carried. Because Jonathan Reed wasn't just a CEO. He was the sole architect of a classified system that could expose corruption, running through some of the largest institutions in the country, a system he was supposed to present quietly to a closed circle of investigators in Seattle that afternoon, and someone had just tried to stop him before he reached that room. He stepped forward on his own. "Let's go, officer. The longer we stay here, the more someone else gets what they want." But as he moved, he saw it just for a second across the terminal. A man in a tailored charcoal coat, watching him, expression blank, eyes unblinking, as if confirming a plan had worked. Then the man turned and vanished into the crowd. Jonathan's pulse hardened. This wasn't random. This wasn't panic. This was a warning. and the sender knew exactly what they were doing. He followed the officers without looking back, each step echoing with a truth he had known for years. The moment you hold something powerful enough to change the country, someone else will always try to break you before you can reveal it. The walls of the interview room hummed with a low, fluorescent buzz, the kind that pressed against the ears and made silence feel heavier than sound. Jonathan sat at the metal table without touching the water bottle waiting for him. His hands rested flat, deliberate, as if any sudden movement might shift the balance of the room. Officer Mendez entered first, calm and steady, followed by a taller man, whose posture announced impatience before his voice did. Lieutenant Harris, broad shoulders, a clipped haircut, a gaze sharpened by too many years of deciding who was lying before they opened their mouths. Harris shut the door with a shove that made the frame quiver. "Mr. Reed," he said, not looking at him yet. "This is an informal conversation. You're not under arrest." His tone said the opposite. He threw a folder on the table. It slid with a soft hiss. Inside were photographs, documents, something printed in red ink. Jonathan didn't look at them. Not yet. Harris circled like a man testing the strength of a fence. "You want to tell me why your name shows up in a restricted registry?" His voice was smooth, but the edge beneath it was blunt, careless, almost eager. Jonathan met his eyes. "Why does it?" The question surprised the lieutenant enough that he paused. Mendez lowered himself quietly into the chair beside Jonathan, his face unreadable. Harris smirked. "Cute. But I'm not in the mood for word games." Jonathan breathed once, slow. "Lieutenant, someone slipped that man a note meant to implicate me. Whoever sent it knows exactly how to manipulate systems, including yours." Harris leaned in. "So you're the victim?" "I'm the target," Jonathan corrected softly. The silence thickened. Harris opened the folder and shoved a photo toward him. Jonathan glanced down. Grainy surveillance, still, a silhouette near a security lane. His silhouette according to the timestamp. Except it wasn't him. The figure moved differently, shoulders narrower, the height off by inches. "That's your profile," Harris said, captured near the time the note was passed. "It's not me." Jonathan didn't raise his voice, didn't flinch. Mendez studied him with careful eyes, weighing the steadiness in his tone. Harris leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms, boots planted wide like a man claiming territory. "You know what I think he asked? I think you're hiding something. People don't stay that calm unless they're guilty or arrogant." Jonathan held his stare. Or practiced. Mendez shifted slightly, a subtle sign of interest. Harris scowled. Jonathan continued. "There are people who spend years preparing to remain calm in hostile environments. Federal investigators, scientists, whistleblowers. People who learn to keep their heartbeat level while others try to provoke them." He paused, letting the weight settle. "You're mistaking training for guilt." Harris opened his mouth to respond, but the door cracked open. A young admin peered inside. "Lieutenant, you'll want to take this." She held a tablet toward him. He snatched it, tapped twice, and his expression shifted from annoyance to something colder. "This was sent to airport security 30 minutes ago," he said. He turned the screen. Jonathan saw a message, anonymous, routed through multiple servers. A warning. 4 words. "Do not let him board." Harris looked at Jonathan like he'd just confirmed every suspicion in the room. "Mr. Reed, seems someone doesn't want you flying today." Jonathan's jaw tightened by a fraction. "Or they want you to think that." Mendez rose. "Lieutenant, this is getting messy. If someone's spoofing security channels, we need cyber involved." Harris waved him off. Cyber can wait. I want answers. He leaned toward Jonathan until their breath nearly touched. Who are you really meeting in Seattle? Jonathan's pulse thudded once hard, though nothing in his expression shifted. A group of analysts and researchers, from where several institutions. Names Jonathan didn't respond. Harris slammed his palm against the table. You don't get to keep secrets here. Jonathan finally picked up the water bottle, not to drink it, but to trace one thumb along the ridge of the cap. A gesture so small, so controlled, it made Harris blink. Lieutenant Jonathan murmured, I don't keep secrets for myself. I keep them because revealing them would put other people at risk. Harris barked a laugh. You expect me to believe you're some kind of protector? No, Jonathan said. I expect you to recognize when someone is setting a trap, and you're walking straight into one. Before Harris could spit another accusation, the door swung open again, this time with force. A woman stepped inside her stride, sharp as broken glass. Evelyn Shaw. Tall, dark hair pinned with surgical precision. Her presence hit the room like a dropped gavel. Lieutenant Harris, she said, voice cool, you're detaining a federal contractor without probable cause. Harris stiffened. This isn't federal business. It is now. She flashed a badge, not loudly, not dramatically, but with absolute authority. Harris paled. Mendez stood immediately instinctively. Agent Shaw. Evelyn nodded once. Officer. Then she turned to Jonathan, and for the first time since morning, something in his shoulders eased. She looked at him, not with sympathy, but with certainty. We need to move. Now. Harris sputtered. You can't just take my witness. He's not your witness, Evelyn snapped. He's the only reason you're not dealing with a catastrophic leak by the end of the day. Jonathan rose. The chair leg scraped softly, a whisper compared to the pounding tension in the room. Harris blocked his path. I'm not done. Evelyn stepped forward, the air turning sharp. Lieutenant, listen to me carefully. If Mr. Reed doesn't make his meeting in Seattle, you will spend the next several years answering to people with far more influence than I have, and I promise you they will not enjoy hearing how your ego compromised an ongoing investigation. Harris faltered. His jaw worked. His certainty cracked. Jonathan's gaze drifted to the glass window of the interview room. Outside, travelers dragged suitcases. Children cried, announcements droned overhead. Normal life churned forward, oblivious to the fault line widening beneath it. If we leave this room, he said quietly to Evelyn, they'll come faster. They already are, she replied. Mendez cleared his throat. Lieutenant, he said slowly, we should let them go. If Shaw's involved, this is above our pay grade. Harris swallowed bitterness, but stepped aside. Fine. But if he runs... Evelyn cut him off. Jonathan Reed doesn't run. It's the people chasing him who should worry. Jonathan stepped into the hallway. The light felt harsher there, too. Clean, too bright. Evelyn walked beside him, heels clicking like countdown ticks. They're escalating, she murmured. First the message, then the impersonation. Now the registry flag. Jonathan nodded. They know the briefing is today. They know what's at stake. Evelyn stopped and turned to him. Are you sure you still want to do this? Once you present the data, there's no turning back. Public institutions, private contractors, entire financial networks will feel threatened. Jonathan held her gaze. His eyes burned with something fierce, restrained, unyielding. That's why they want to stop me. They reached the security exit reserved for staff. A guard recognized Evelyn and buzzed them through. As the door clicked shut behind them, she leaned in. Jonathan, the man who flagged you. We traced a digital signature. It belongs to someone who shouldn't have access anymore." Jonathan breathed out. Slow. "Who?" Evelyn whispered the name. Jonathan froze. His chest tightened, as if the air had suddenly thickened. "He's dead," Jonathan said. "He was declared dead nearly 5 years ago." Evelyn's voice dropped lower. Apparently someone forgot to tell him. They moved quickly toward a restricted service corridor. The fluorescent lights flickered above, and the echo of their footsteps stretched through the long concrete hall like a warning. Jonathan felt a faint tremor in the floor, not real, but in his memory. The last time he'd heard that name, he'd been standing inside a sealed lab staring at data that could unravel entire industries. A man who once worked beside him, a man who vanished without a trace, a man whose disappearance was ruled an accident, and now someone using his signature was hunting Jonathan. The exit door loomed ahead. Beyond it, freedom, or another trap. Evelyn reached for the push bar and froze. Jonathan saw it too, a shadow beneath the door. Still. Too still. Evelyn stepped back. Jonathan's heartbeat slowed, deepened, sharpened. "They anticipated you," he murmured. Evelyn nodded once. "Plan B." She moved to a side door leading to a stairwell. Jonathan followed each step, descending into cooler air, denser shadows. The deeper they went, the more the noise of the airport faded, until it was nothing but breath and the distant hum of industrial machinery. At the bottom, Evelyn cracked open the stairwell door. A loading bay stretched before them, quiet, nearly empty, bathed in pale morning light, filtering through high windows. A lone maintenance worker pushed a cart across the far end. Safe. For now. They stepped out, tension easing for a moment. Then the worker looked up, and Jonathan recognized the eyes. Cold. Focused. Familiar. Not a worker. Not by a long stretch. Evelyn whispered, "Run." The man in the maintenance uniform didn't move at first. He simply stood there, one gloved hand resting lightly on the handle of the cart, his gaze fixed on Jonathan, with the stillness of a predator, deciding whether the moment was right to strike. Then, with a slow and deliberate motion, he slipped his hand beneath the cart's draped cloth. Evelyn didn't wait. She grabbed Jonathan's arm, her voice low but sharp as a snapped wire. "Back. Now." Their footsteps echoed across the concrete like shots as they retreated into the stairwell, letting the heavy door swing shut between them and the figure outside. The metal clanged with a finality that sent a cold shiver down Jonathan's spine. They took the stairs 2 at a time. Jonathan could hear Evelyn's breath tight and measured, not panicked, but calculating. Above them, the airport's machinery vibrated faintly through the structure, masking some sounds, but amplifying others, especially the deep, low thud that came from the loading bay door a moment later. Someone testing its strength. Evelyn didn't look back. "He's not alone," she muttered. "He never works alone." "How do you know it's really him?" Jonathan asked. "I don't," she said. "That's what worries me." They pushed through the stairwell door into a narrow service corridor that smelled faintly of old pipes and industrial cleaner. It ran underneath the terminal, like a forgotten artery meant for staff who kept the airport functioning, without ever being seen. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting a jittery glow across the walls. Evelyn quickened her pace. "We need to reach the old operations office. There's a secure line there. Landline, not digital." "They can't intercept that." Jonathan nodded. "How far? 3 minutes if nothing slows us down. Longer if she didn't finish." But the interruption came sooner than either expected. A maintenance door ahead creaked open, and a man stepped out mid-30s, sandy hair, pale skin expression, neutral the way trained operatives learn to neutralize their presence. His badge looked real. His uniform looked real. But something about the way he moved was wrong. Too smooth. Too practiced. Evelyn stopped instantly and stepped in front of Jonathan. "We're with airport security," she said, her voice authoritative. "Clear the hallway." The man didn't answer. He closed the door behind him with a soft click, blocking their path. His eyes drifted to Jonathan, then back to Evelyn, as if taking silent measure of both. Jonathan felt a single icy thought form in the back of his mind. They're already ahead of us. Evelyn's hand slid subtly toward her coat, where a concealed badge, real this time, waited. The man noticed. His lips parted slightly, and a thin smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "No sudden movements," Evelyn warned. The man raised both hands in a gesture that almost looked peaceful. That was the only warning they got. Because the next moment, the lights above them flickered violently, a loud pop burst from the ceiling, and darkness swallowed the corridor. Evelyn grabbed Jonathan's wrist. "Move!" They sprinted back the way they came, the corridor now lit only by dim emergency lamps, casting long, distorted shadows on the walls. Behind them, rapid footsteps echoed, multiplied, more than one person now. Jonathan's heartbeat surged, each pulse sharp in his ears. He followed Evelyn around a sharp corner. She stopped long enough to punch a code into an unmarked door panel. The lock clicked. She shoved it open. They slipped inside, and Evelyn slammed the door shut. The room was small, cluttered with old metal cabinets and circuit boxes humming with residual electricity. A square vent near the ceiling rattled under the pressure of recycled air. The room had no windows. Only one exit. One door. Jonathan leaned against a cabinet, palms braced, breathing heavy, not from fear, but from the sheer velocity of everything happening at once. Evelyn pressed an ear to the door. "They're right outside." Jonathan forced his breath slow. "You still haven't told me how he's alive." Evelyn didn't look at him. "Because I don't know. He shouldn't be." "You confirmed the signature." "Digital signatures can be replicated by the person who created them." Her voice thinned. "And he created that system." Jonathan stared at the dim light above them. Memories crashed through his mind. Later nights in a sealed lab, the metallic smell of servers, overheating arguments that rattled glass walls, and a man whose brilliance darkened into obsession. A man who once told Jonathan, quietly, almost gently, "If you expose the truth, they won't kill you. They'll erase you." The doorknob rattled. Jonathan's muscles tensed. Evelyn lifted a finger, signaling him to stay silent. Footsteps shuffled just outside. Then, nothing. A long, unnatural silence loomed like a shadow stretching across the floor. Evelyn whispered, "They're waiting for us to panic." Jonathan looked around the room. What else is in here? Power relays. Old alarm systems. Nothing useful. Jonathan spotted the vent overhead. What about that? Evelyn followed his gaze. Too small. Not for me, Jonathan said. She raised a brow. "Since when are you trained for ventilation escapes?" He held her eyes. "Since before I ever met you." It wasn't arrogance. It was truth. A truth he had buried deeper than any classified system he'd built. Evelyn studied him for a long second, then nodded. "Fine. I'll lift you." She moved a metal crate beneath the vent. Jonathan climbed up. Evelyn steadied him, fingers gripping the back of his jacket. He punched the metal grate once, twice. It gave way with a groan. He hoisted himself inside the narrow shaft, the metal cold against his palms. Evelyn handed him the grate. "Put it back once you're inside. It may buy us some time." Jonathan did. Darkness wrapped around him, thick and metallic. The hum of the airport vibrated faintly above like a distant heart beating through concrete. Evelyn called up softly. "Follow the vent to the second junction. Drop down. That leads to the emergency stairwell by the old operations room." "What about you?" Jonathan asked. "I'll create noise." "They'll follow me." Her voice steadied. "It's what they expect." Jonathan hesitated. Evelyn sure didn't take unnecessary risks. If she was offering herself as bait, it meant the situation was worse than she'd admitted. "Evelyn, go," she whispered. "If you hesitate, we both die." The door behind her jolted violently. Metal groaned. A deep voice shouted from the corridor. "Shaw, step away from the door." Another voice. Calm cold followed. A voice Jonathan recognized in an instant, because it belonged to the ghost he thought time had buried. "Let him come out, Evelyn. He knows this ends one way." Jonathan froze inside the vent. The sound of that voice reopened an old wound he had spent years stitching shut. Evelyn didn't respond. Instead, she slammed her fist into the nearest electrical panel. Sparks erupted. The corridor outside exploded in shouted commands. Jonathan began crawling. Fast. Metal scraped beneath him. Dust coated his palms. The vent narrowed, then twisted, then opened slightly near the first junction. He kept going. His breath echoed back at him in shallow bursts. Voices followed, muffled, but persistent, moving through the corridor, like a tide hunting its source. He reached the second junction, kicked at the grate until it loosened, dropped down into a dim utility hall that smelled of concrete and old wiring. His knees hit the floor hard, but he forced himself up. The ghost's voice drifted faintly through the vents above. "You can run, Jonathan. But you built the system. You should know by now there's nowhere it can't find you." Jonathan's breath stilled. So the ghost wasn't just alive. He had the system that was never supposed to leave Jonathan's hands. Footsteps sounded down the hall. Jonathan spun heart-hammering, once the only warning, before a figure rounded the corner. Not an enemy. Officer Mendez. His chest rose and fell sharply, as if he had been searching. "Mr. Reed, thank God." Jonathan blinked, stunned. "How did you find me? I followed your trail," Mendez said. "Shaw told me enough. Not everything, but enough to know you're in real danger." Jonathan stepped closer. "If you're here, you need to understand something. Whoever is hunting me has access to systems they shouldn't. They can manipulate identities, location surveillance. They already flagged me in your registry." Mendez nodded grimly. "I know. That's why I came." Why, Jonathan asked. Mendez didn't hesitate. "Because I think you're the only one who can stop him." Jonathan exhaled, the weight finally settling. This wasn't about a note, or a misidentification, or a delayed flight. This was the opening move in a war he had tried his whole life to avoid. Mendez stepped aside, revealing an access door behind him. "If we leave now, we can reach the old operations room before they do." Jonathan stared at the door. His pulse steadied. His jaw tightened. Something fierce rose inside him. Not fear, not rage, but purpose. The kind that made him who he was long before. Titles and secrets hardened his life. "Then let's move," he said. Because for the first time since the morning began, Jonathan Reed wasn't running. He was advancing. Jonathan pushed through the access door first, the stale air of the utility hallway, giving way to a sharper current, cold and metallic. Mendez followed close behind, shutting the door with a soft click that sounded far too fragile against the pressure closing in around them. The stairwell beyond stretched downward into dim industrial light, a concrete throat that swallowed sound faster than footsteps could echo. Jonathan descended quickly, hands grazing the railing mind, running even faster than his feet. Each step seemed to pulse with a question that refused to leave him. How long had the ghost been watching? How many moves had been made before Jonathan ever realized he was on the board? Mendez stayed a half step behind his breath, steady but tight. The old operations room, he said quietly, was decommissioned after the new control systems came online. Most staff don't even remember it's here. Jonathan nodded without slowing. Which is why he'll look for it. Then why go there? Mendez demanded. Jonathan paused mid-step, turning his head slightly. Because that room has something he doesn't expect. Mendez swallowed. What's that? Jonathan met his eyes. Analog. They reached the bottom landing. A long hallway stretched before them, lined with doors bearing faded labels from another era. Maintenance, storage, electrical sea flight ops archive. But one door at the far end stood different from the others. No label. No window. Just a heavy steel slab with a rusted handle, as if the airport had tried to erase its existence, not preserve it. Jonathan walked toward it with the certainty of someone returning to a place he'd never wanted to see again. As he reached for the handle, Mendez grabbed his arm. Wait. Jonathan stiffened. What Mendez pointed to the floor, a faint, smeared line of dark residue just beneath the door, barely visible unless one looked deliberately. Jonathan crouched, brushing 2 fingers lightly across it. The texture was unmistakable. Grease. Fresh. Someone had opened that door recently. Not long ago. Jonathan rose slowly. He's already here. Mendez pulled his service flashlight from his belt, flicking it on with a low click. Then we move quiet. Jonathan pushed the door open. It groaned as though waking from a decades-long sleep. The room beyond lay in muted darkness, illuminated only by the cone of Mendez's flashlight sweeping across old consoles, dusty rotary switches, abandoned monitors, heavy with the weight of analog circuitry. It was like stepping into a preserved fossil, an operations center, from 20 years before, untouched and forgotten. Perfect for someone who wanted to work without digital traces. Jonathan moved toward the far table where a landline phone sat connected to a thick, coiled cord. It was old enough to survive a power failure, old enough to survive anything. Evelyn's plan depended on it. He reached for the receiver but stopped cold. The line was cut. Mendez swept the light across the wall. The phone wire dangled in 2 severed pieces, each end frayed. He knew, Mendez whispered. He knew you'd come here. Jonathan exhaled through his nose. Not fear. Recognition. Calculated precision. The ghost had always been surgical. A soft sound came from somewhere deeper in the room. Not a footstep. A shift of air. A breath. Jonathan raised a hand, signaling to Mendez to dim the flashlight. Mendez lowered it until the room softened into a haze of shadows. For several long seconds they stood still. The silence pressed on their ears like cold water. Then a voice emerged from the dark, smooth quiet, threaded with an unsettling calm. I wondered how long it would take you to find this place, Jonathan. The voice crawled across the consoles and steel panels like a serpent looking for warmth. A figure stepped forward, illuminated only faintly by the emergency lights. Tall, lean, movements too precise to be mistaken. Not a reflection of the past, a continuation. Jonathan's jaw tightened. I didn't expect you to hide behind abandoned rooms. The ghost tilted his head. I'm not hiding. I'm measuring. Mendez angled his flashlight up just enough to catch the man's face, without blinding him. Early 40s. Eyes sharp with intelligence, steeped in arrogance. A faint scar along the jawline, Jonathan recognized instantly, a scar earned in a lab accident that should have ended the man's career, but instead forged something darker inside him. Mendez stepped forward. "Hands where I can see them," Officer the Ghost said politely. "You don't want to do that." Jonathan felt a chill run through him, not from the threat, but from the quiet accuracy with which the man delivered it. The Ghost continued, "This isn't about harm, it's about truth, and you're standing in the way of it." Jonathan stepped between them. "Your truth involved sabotaging an investigation, manipulating airport systems, putting innocent people at risk. Is that the truth you're referring to?" The Ghost smiled faintly. "You once believed in what we built together, until you became afraid of what it revealed." Afraid, Jonathan's voice deepened. "No. Responsible. There's a difference." The Ghost took a step closer. Mendez raised the flashlight, ready to strike, if needed, but the Ghost didn't flinch. "They didn't tell you the rest, did they?" he asked, his eyes flickering to Mendez. "They didn't tell you who funds the program? Who stands to lose when this man delivers his briefing in Seattle?" Mendez hesitated. Jonathan knew that hesitation well. It was the type that comes from standing on a fault line, unsure which side would collapse first. Jonathan spoke quietly. "Don't listen to him." But the Ghost's next words drove into the room like a blade. Officer, ask him why his work was classified above top secret. Ask him why 8 senior officials signed non-disclosure agreements under threat of imprisonment. Ask him why the system he built was shut down after identifying corruption in places too powerful to confront. Mendez's breath hitched. "Is that true?" Jonathan met his gaze, his voice steady. "Some of it. Twisted the way he wants it." The Ghost laughed lightly. "Oh, Jonathan. Still hiding behind half-truths. You think you can stop what's coming?" He stepped closer. "You think your briefing will save them?" Jonathan felt something shift in his chest. "It's not meant to save them. It's meant to expose them." The Ghost's smile vanished. In its place, a cold fury. "Then you leave me no choice." He reached toward a cabinet beside him, fast. Too fast. Mendez reacted on instinct, lunging forward with the flashlight raised overhead. The Ghost swung the cabinet door open and yanked out a small metal device. Not a weapon, a jammer, designed to overload analog circuits. Jonathan shouted, "Mendez, stop!" But it was too late. The Ghost slammed the device against the central console, and a burst of electric static roared through the room. Lights flickered violently. Sparks shot from old wires. The floor trembled under the strain of systems powered on for the first time in years. Jonathan lunged toward the console, grabbing the Ghost's wrist, twisting with controlled force. The device clattered to the floor. Mendez grabbed the Ghost from behind, pinning his arms. For a moment, the struggle froze, 3 bodies locked in tension, each breath ragged and hot. Then the emergency lights died, plunging the room into darkness. A fist struck something. Someone grunted. A body slammed into metal. Jonathan heard Mendez curse, followed by the sound of scrambling feet. Chaos erupted in the dark hallway beyond. Someone was moving. Fast. Jonathan Mendez called out. "Which way?" But Jonathan already knew. The Ghost wouldn't run toward the exit. He'd run deeper. Toward the old maintenance tunnels that stretched beneath the airport like forgotten veins. Jonathan moved fast, guided not by light, but by memory, because he had studied the airport map weeks ago. He knew the tunnels existed. He never imagined he'd be chasing someone through them. He pushed aside a swinging panel door and slipped into a narrow passage where a thin slice of natural light filtered through a high grate. Footsteps echoed ahead. The ghost was moving quickly, but not aimlessly. He had a destination, a plan. Jonathan followed the sound heart, pounding every breath, rough in his throat. Then a sudden crash, a grunt, a body falling. Jonathan turned a corner and froze. Evelyn Shaw lay against a wall, one hand pressed to her ribs, breath sharp and shallow. "He came through here," she whispered, pointing toward a darkened tunnel. "Jonathan, he has access codes, all of them." Jonathan knelt beside her. "Evelyn, are you hurt?" She shook her head once, lips tight with pain. "Go. If he reaches the server, trunk lines under the west wing, he can bury everything. Rewrite all of it. He'll erase the investigation before you ever reach Seattle." Jonathan stood. His fear was gone. His hesitation gone. What remained was something colder older, forged long before this morning. He wasn't chasing a ghost anymore. He was hunting him. And the truth would not stay buried. Not again. Jonathan moved through the tunnel with a speed that bordered on instinct, each step guided by memory sound and a tightening thread of certainty pulling him forward. The air grew colder as he descended through the narrow corridor, the stale scent of dust mixing with the metallic tang of old wiring. Overhead, a faint rumble of aircraft vibrated through the concrete, muffled and distant, as though the outside world were slipping further away with every foot he traveled underground. He wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. Not fear. Focus. He had spent years preparing to confront the consequences of his own work, but he had never imagined the confrontation would come here in the forgotten marrow of an airport. Behind him, Evelyn's strained breathing slowly faded as distance grew. He trusted her to find help, trusted that she would hold herself together long enough to warn the right people. But trust had limits, and the man Jonathan was pursuing thrived in the space beyond those limits. The ghost knew every weak seam in the system, every blind spot in a structure like this. That was why Jonathan couldn't rely on backup. He was the only one who knew the ghost's patterns, not because they were predictable, but because they were born from the same design principles Jonathan himself had once believed in. Up ahead, a faint metallic echo ricocheted off the tunnel walls. Not footsteps. A door closing. Jonathan slowed, letting his breathing regulate into a near-silent rhythm. His shoes brushed softly against the concrete each stride, gentle enough not to announce his approach. He reached a fork, left leading to the older baggage routing tunnels, right to the utility hub beneath the west wing. Evelyn had said the server trunk lines lay beneath that wing. The ghost wouldn't waste time. He'd go for the place where the system could be rewritten fastest. Jonathan turned right. The tunnel widened gradually, opening into a cavernous space that had once served as a connector for early airport expansion. It was abandoned now, concrete dust coating every horizontal surface, old crates stacked in forgotten heaps, distant fluorescent lamps flickering weakly like dying stars. The emptiness carried a strange weight, as though the room held the memory of past motion, past purpose. Jonathan stepped inside. The silence hit him like a wave. Then he saw it, a thin beam of light slicing through the dark from a partially open maintenance doorway across the chamber. Someone was inside. Jonathan approached cautiously. 10 feet away he stopped. A figure moved behind the door. Slow, controlled. Then a voice drifted out, calm as still water. "You're making this difficult, Jonathan." Jonathan's jaw clenched. "Tell me why you're doing this." The ghost didn't emerge. Instead, he let his shadow fall across the doorway. "Because you didn't finish what you started. Because you built a system powerful enough to expose the entire architecture of deception, and then you got scared. Jonathan stepped closer. I didn't get scared. I became aware. And aware is not the same as afraid. Spoken like someone who's forgotten the scale of what he touched, the ghost murmured. Jonathan pushed the door open. Hard. Inside the maintenance room, servers hummed softly old backup drives, still connected to the airport's broader infrastructure. A panel on one wall glowed faintly. That panel shouldn't have been powered. Not anymore. The ghost stood in front of it, hands behind his back, posture, relaxed head, tilted as though contemplating an art piece rather than a piece of hardware capable of altering every system in the terminal. Jonathan froze. You bypassed the mains. The ghost smiled. You gave me the blueprint, my friend. It was easy. I wasn't your friend, Jonathan said. I was your guardrail. Then you failed, the ghost replied, turning to face him fully. For a moment, time seemed to stretch thin. Jonathan studied him, the scar along his jawline, the intelligence in his gaze still sharp, still dangerous, still hungry. A hunger that had begun in curiosity, but mutated into something ravenous, obsessive. Jonathan took another step. Whatever you think you're preventing by stopping me, it's a lie. They didn't shut the project down to bury a conspiracy. They shut it down because it was unstable, because you made it unstable. The ghost let out a soft, almost pitying sigh. No, Jonathan. You made it unstable when you tried to separate truth from consequences. You built a system to reveal the world's rot, but then insisted on controlling who got to see it. You wanted to expose corruption selectively. You wanted to protect the institutions still worth saving. That's not truth. That's curation. And what you're doing is righteous, Jonathan demanded. You're blending reality and suspicion until no one can tell the difference. That's the point, the ghost said quietly. When a system is diseased, you don't try to heal it. You purge it. Jonathan's heartbeat shook once hard. You think you're cleansing the world, you're weaponizing uncertainty. Uncertainty is powerful, the ghost answered. People worship certainty. They cling to it like children clutching blankets. But if you shake their confidence in everything governments, data, institutions, they panic. And in panic they reveal who they really are. Jonathan exhaled slowly. You're going to collapse the entire infrastructure to prove a philosophical point. No, the ghost said. I'm going to collapse it, so the truth can finally be rebuilt without compromise. Jonathan lunged. He didn't think, didn't calculate. His body simply moved with the kind of precision born from the same training the ghost believed only he possessed. Jonathan struck the ghost's wrist mid-air, knocking aside the device he had been holding, a compact relay spike capable of rerouting the analog trunk line. It clattered across the floor, sparks flaring. The ghost shoved Jonathan backward, sending him crashing against a metal rack. Pain shot through his ribs, but he pushed forward again. Their hands locked muscles, straining breaths sharp and hot between gritted teeth. For a moment, they were two halves of the same machine, built from the same principles, trained in the same discipline, but diverging into incompatible beliefs. The ghost twisted Jonathan's arm. Jonathan countered, pivoting his weight, using momentum rather than force. The ghost stumbled, but didn't fall. A smile flickered at the edge of his mouth. You're better than before. And you're worse, Jonathan replied. They clashed again, this time, faster fists, meeting forearms, elbows driving toward ribs' feet, scraping across concrete. A flurry of movement, brutal in its efficiency, No wasted energy, no unnecessary strikes, just technique honed in the quiet, brutal hours of training labs where failure wasn't punished, it was studied. Jonathan barely avoided a blow that would have snapped his jaw. He ducked, swept low, and slammed his shoulder into the ghost's legs. The ghost hit the floor with a harsh grunt. But he didn't stay down. He grabbed the nearest metal tool from the ground, swung upward. Jonathan dodged by inches. The tool scraped his sleeve, slicing fabric, grazing skin. Jonathan seized the ghost's wrist again, twisting until bone creaked. The ghost hissed but smiled. "You won't kill me. I don't have to," Jonathan said. "I just have to stop you." With a sudden burst of strength, Jonathan drove the ghost backward, slamming him against the server panel. The impact jolted the room lights flickering, but the ghost's hand shot out, slamming a switch on the wall. The panel powered up fully. A deep hum rippled through the floor. Jonathan's eyes widened. "What did you do?" The ghost breathed hard, but with triumph burning in his eyes. "Started the purge." Jonathan grabbed him again, pinning him with all the force he could muster. "Shut it off." "I can't," the ghost rasped. "Only you can." Jonathan turned toward the panel. Warning lights blinked red. Lines of analog circuitry began rerouting. The trunk line system was rebooting into a corrupted loop. The purge wasn't digital, it was physical, mechanical, which meant it couldn't be reversed with a simple command. Jonathan released the ghost, rushing to the panel, tugging at wires, pulling connectors. Sparks shot out. A low alarm reverberated through the concrete under their feet. "You'll overload the whole wing," Jonathan warned. "That's the idea," the ghost whispered, sliding down the wall, breath shaky. Jonathan tore open another panel. The hum rose into a growl. If it peaked, the airport would go dark. Not just systems. Communications, safety grids, backup networks, a collapse on a scale far beyond a flight delay. He reached for the master bypass switch but stopped. It wasn't here. The ghost chuckled softly. "You think I didn't redesign the failsafe?" Jonathan turned back to him. "Where is it?" The ghost lifted his chin weakly toward the ceiling. "Above us. In the ventilation shaft. You'd have to climb." Jonathan didn't hesitate. He grabbed the edge of the nearest rack, hauled himself up, reached for the support beam. The hum deepened into a violent vibration. Dust showered down. A distant alarm began to wail overhead. As Jonathan pulled himself toward the vent, the ghost whispered, just loud enough to reach him, "You're too late." Jonathan looked down at him, exhausted, bleeding, desperate but not broken. "No," he said. "You underestimated me again." He shoved the vent open and climbed into the rising darkness. Jonathan dragged himself into the narrow vent metal, scraping beneath his palms, dust filling the air in thin grey streams that clung to his breath. The vibration from the purge system trembled through the ducts like a giant heartbeat, growing faster, louder, more erratic with every second. Heat swelled around him, radiating upward from the machinery below, turning the vent into a confined furnace. He pushed forward anyway, elbows, digging muscles, burning each movement, punctuated by the metallic groan of old infrastructure, straining under the surge. Behind him, the ghost's voice rose faintly from the room below, warped by the roaring circuits. "You built this cage, Jonathan. I'm only locking the doors." Jonathan didn't look back. He couldn't waste the breath or the seconds. He knew where the master override had been relocated, an emergency fail-safe panel embedded above the ventilation grid, unreachable from below to prevent tampering. He remembered arguing for that design years before. He hadn't known then that someday he'd be the one forced to crawl toward it, while the entire system threatened to collapse onto itself. Sweat slid down the side of his face. The vent tightened around him. The heat bit at his skin as though urging him to turn around. Abandon the effort, let the inevitable happen. But Jonathan kept crawling, each pull of his body a defiance, each breath a reminder of the years he'd spent fighting to keep the truth honest and untouched by the wrong hands. He had run from many things in his life, but never from responsibility. A clatter echoed behind him, the sound of someone entering the vent. Jonathan stiffened. He turned his head just enough to glimpse movement in the dark. A dim beam of light cut through the dust, shaky but deliberate. Mr. Reed Mendez called softly, his voice strained but steady. "Don't stop." Jonathan's chest lifted with a mix of relief and dread. "Why did you follow me?" "Because I've seen enough today to understand one thing," Mendez answered, inching forward. "You're not the one we should be stopping." Jonathan turned forward again. "You're going to slow yourself down." "Then move faster," Mendez said. Jonathan did. They crawled deeper into the vent, the metal trembling harder, the purge cycle now producing a rhythmic thumping sound. Far below them, like the airport's infrastructure had become a living thing, trying to break free. Jonathan recognized the pattern compressors overloading analog relays, cycling without direction, the entire system seconds from grounding itself into corruption. The vent forked overhead. Jonathan veered left, remembering the internal map burned into his memory from the project's earliest days. The metal beneath him shuddered violently. Dust rained from the seams. A screw popped loose, clinking sharply against the aluminum. Mendez swore under his breath. "How close are we? Close enough that the heat should be rising," Jonathan answered. "And it is." Sure enough, the air grew hotter, thicker, almost liquid. Jonathan's lungs clawed for breath. His shoulders scraped the narrowing duct walls. The heat intensified until every inch of metal burned against his palms. Then he saw it, a faint blue glow ahead, pulsing through the vent slits like a heartbeat of light. "We're here," he whispered. Jonathan kicked out the grate with the last reserve of strength he had. It clattered to the floor of a narrow control cavity, no larger than a crawl space, but alive with electrical energy. A cluster of analog breakers lined the far wall, and at the center of them, all just as he remembered, was a single red rotary switch encased in a metal guard. The master override. But something was wrong. A secondary device had been clamped onto the wiring, a small black module, no larger than a pack of cards. The ghost's handiwork. Jonathan lowered himself carefully into the cavity boots, landing on metal mesh that vibrated as if the whole space were trembling in fear. Mendez dropped behind him, grimacing against the heat. What now? Jonathan approached the switch. "This module is forcing the purge into a feedback loop. I can stop the cycle, but if I pull the override without removing this, it'll fry everything in here, including us." "So remove it," Mendez said. Jonathan shook his head slowly. "It's wired into the live line. It'll discharge if I touch it." Mendez stared at him, breath tight. "Then what are you saying?" Jonathan closed his eyes for a moment, hearing the low thrum of a system being pushed to its breaking point. "I'm saying he designed it, so only he could disarm it." Mendez cursed softly. "There has to be something you can do." Jonathan studied the wiring. The black module pulsed faintly, in sync with the purge cycle. A faint odor of overheated insulation filled the air. The walls vibrated. It wouldn't hold much longer. He scanned the panel, searching for any way to redirect the discharge, divert the surge, starve the feedback loop. Then he saw it. a grounding junction mounted near the base of the cavity. Old, rusted, barely functional, but still connected. If he could link the feedback wire to that junction, the surge would ground itself harmlessly, at least harmless to him and Mendez. The system would shut down with minimal damage, but the wire was too short to reach, and the metal bracket securing the module was welded tight. Mendez saw it too. "Tell me how to help." Jonathan looked at him, truly looked at him. A man thrown into a war he didn't understand, choosing a side by instinct alone. "You hold the grounding junction steady," Jonathan said. "I'll free the wire." Mendez nodded. He knelt beside the old junction, gripping its edges with both hands. Jonathan pulled a metal multi-tool from his pocket. "This will spark. Don't move no matter what happens." Mendez swallowed hard. "Do it." Jonathan wedged the tool beneath the bracket, prying with every ounce of strength left in his arms. The purge cycle roared beneath them. The air seared his skin. The metal whined, bent, resisted, then snapped. The black module jolted, emitting a violent burst of electricity that cracked through the cavity like lightning. Jonathan grabbed the wire with insulated pliers, the shock slamming through his arm, even through the protective grip. He gritted his teeth, forcing his body not to let go. Now Mendez held the junction. Mendez braced himself, arms trembling, sweat rolling down his forehead as the discharge struck him through the metal. His jaw locked, veins bulging in his neck, but he didn't let go. Jonathan pressed the wire to the junction. A blinding flash lit the cavity. A scream, raw and primal, ripped from Mendez's throat. Then everything went still. Jonathan fell backward, chest-heaving vision blurred by spots of white. Mendez slumped to the side, breathing in sharp, shallow bursts, but alive. The purge cycle went silent. Jonathan forced himself to his feet, staggering toward Mendez. "Stay with me." Mendez blinked, slowly trying to focus. "You did it." Jonathan shook his head. "We did it." A faint sound echoed above them. A voice, distant but recognizable. "Evelyn." Jonathan reached the vent grate. Down here, he shouted. Moments later, Evelyn's face appeared pale but determined. "Is it over?" Jonathan nodded once. Not triumphant. Not relieved. Just certain. "We stopped the purge," he said. "But he's still out there." Evelyn extended a hand to pull him up. "Then we find him before he resets the game." Jonathan looked down at Mendez, then back at the tunnel, stretching into darkness, the path the ghost had taken. His pulse steadied. "We don't just find him," Jonathan said quietly. "We end this." And as he climbed out of the cavity, the airport seemed to exhale a fragile moment of calm before the next storm gathered its strength. Evelyn moved first, climbing backward through the vent, with a surgeon's precision, her breath shallow, her eyes sharp despite the exhaustion lining her face. Jonathan followed, pulling himself into the narrow tunnel, every muscle trembling from the surge that had ripped through his body minutes earlier. Mendez lay below, still dazed but breathing steadily, and the faint hum of emergency systems, settling into safe mode, vibrated through the metal like a tired sigh. They had won a battle, yes, but the ghost had not lost the war. The vent stretched ahead like a long steel throat illuminated only by Evelyn's flashlight and the dim blue glow of backup power. Jonathan crawled behind her, his mind working faster than his hands could keep up. The purge cycle hadn't been the ghost's endgame. It had been a test, a probe, a warning. And the message was unmistakable. "I think he wanted you to choose," Evelyn said suddenly, her voice tight but level. Jonathan looked up. "Choose what? Whether to save the system or save yourself. He wanted to see which direction you'd bend." Jonathan said nothing. The scrape of metal under their knees filled the silence. He knew she was right. He could feel it in the absence of triumph inside him. The ghost had built this trap to watch him react, to measure his resolve, to see whether Jonathan Reed was still the man who once designed the backbone of the National Aviation Network, an invisible lattice of logic and integrity that everyone depended on, but no one saw. They reached a junction, and Evelyn swung her legs down through the new opening. She landed on a concrete platform inside a restricted maintenance corridor. Jonathan followed, gripping the edge before easing himself down. The corridor pulsed with emergency lights, slow red waves washing over metal pipes, casting long shadows that moved like living things. Jonathan dusted his hands against his jeans. He's somewhere in this sector. He wouldn't have triggered a purge cycle and run far. He wants proximity. Evelyn gave him a look that cut deep. He wants you. Jonathan opened his mouth, but footsteps echoed down the corridor before he could speak. Both froze. The sound was uneven, one step dragging, one step steady, like someone half limping, half stalking. Then a silhouette appeared, tall, broad-shouldered, swaying slightly as it moved toward them. Mendez. He reached them with a groan, bracing himself against the wall. His skin was ghost-pale sweat dripping from his temples. "Don't think I'm sitting this out," he muttered, voice shaking. Jonathan stepped forward, steadying him by the arm. "You need medical attention." "And you need backup," Mendez snapped, surprising them both with the force in his voice. Then softer, "I'm not letting whatever this is swallow the airport with me, stuck on the sidelines." Evelyn nodded once, an acknowledgement of grit. "We move together." But slowly. He wants us rattled. We don't give him that. They advanced deeper into the maintenance artery. Pipes hissed faintly overhead. Distant machinery clicked in and out of standby. Somewhere a radio crackled with static, then died. Every sound felt amplified by tension. Halfway down the corridor, Jonathan stopped abruptly. Evelyn turned. "What is it?" Jonathan knelt beside a small device lying near the wall, a portable data scrambler with a cracked housing and wires still warm to the touch. He lifted it carefully, eyes narrowing. "He was here minutes ago," Jonathan murmured. "He's patching into the analog backups." "But why analog?" Mendez asked. Jonathan stared at the cracked device, his pulse tightening. "Because it's harder to track," he said. "Harder to intercept. And harder to prove." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "He's hiding in the blind spots of your own design." Jonathan didn't deny it. "Yes. And he's using the parts he knows I can't ignore." Before Evelyn could respond, a loud metallic bang jolted through the corridor. It echoed sharp and unnatural, bouncing off the tile like a gunshot. Jonathan looked up sharply. "That wasn't machinery," he said. "That was a door." Mendez lifted his flashlight. Which direction Jonathan pointed. "East Service Wing." "That's where the old operations room is." Evelyn's voice dropped almost a whisper. "The room you built?" Jonathan didn't correct her. He simply began walking faster, each step fueled by a mixture of dread and something sharper, colder resolve. They rounded a corner, and the corridor widened into a long hall lined with industrial cabinets and emergency access consoles. Halfway down the hall, a door stood ajar, its frame bent as though forced open from inside. Light spilled through the crack in jagged shards. Jonathan inhaled once, shallow and steady. "He's inside." Evelyn drew closer eyes, narrowing, reading Jonathan's face, as if scanning code. "Before we go in," she said quietly, "you need to tell me something. Why is he doing this? Not the technical reason. The real reason." Jonathan looked at the door, then at her, and something inside him loosened, something he had held quiet for years. "He used to work for me," Jonathan said. "Before anyone knew his name, before they called him a genius, before he went dark." Mendez let out a low whistle. "So this is personal." "No," Jonathan said softly. "It's worse than personal. It's ideological." Evelyn stepped closer, her voice steady. "Then tell me what he wants." Jonathan closed his eyes for the briefest moment, the memory of a man with sharp eyes and a sharper mind flashing through his thoughts. "He wants to prove the system can't be trusted," Jonathan whispered. "And he wants me to watch it fail." Evelyn placed a hand on the door. "Then we don't give him what he wants." Jonathan nodded. They pushed the door open. The room was lit only by the glow of ancient monitors humming along the far wall. Dust floated in slow motion through the beams of light. Tangled wires draped over consoles like veins, and at the center of the room facing them sat a single analog terminal, flickering with half-alive signal. But no ghost. The chair was empty. Jonathan stepped forward, scanning the monitors. Lines of static crawled across the screens, breaking occasionally into bursts of distorted data. Evelyn moved to the far corner, shining her light across the floor's walls, ceiling, anything that might reveal a clue. Then she froze. "Jonathan," she said, voice barely above breath. He turned. Evelyn pointed at the wall. There, painted across the surface, in bold, uneven strokes of dark ink, were 4 words: "You fixed the wrong system." Jonathan's stomach tightened. The message wasn't a threat. It was a verdict, a declaration. And then the terminal in the center of the room crackled, sputtered, and flicked to life. A voice, digitally warped, barely human, filled the space. "Round 1, it whispered. "You survived. Let's see how you do when the stakes aren't circuits, but people." Jonathan felt the blood drain from his face. Evelyn stared at him, jaw set. "He's escalating." Mendez leaned his weight against the wall. "What does that mean?" Jonathan didn't answer immediately. His mind worked through possibilities, scenarios, vulnerabilities. Then he looked at them with an expression that chilled the room more than the ghost's message. "It means we're no longer protecting the airport," Jonathan said, quietly. "We're protecting everyone inside it." And as the distorted voice faded, the terminal display shifted, showing a live feed of the crowded main terminal, thousands of travelers unaware they were now part of a game one brilliant broken man had begun. Jonathan exhaled once. The real war had just started. The terminal feed shifted again, the camera panning across crowds of travelers who moved with that familiar mixture of impatience and distraction, pulling suitcases, sipping coffee, arguing softly into phones. None of them knew that every breath they took now balanced on the whim of a man who had vanished into the airport's bones. Jonathan stared at the screen, as though willing the image to give up a clue. Evelyn stood just behind him, arms crossed tightly, jaw clenched, as the weight of responsibility settled over her like a winter frost. Mendez leaned on a support beam, still pale but refusing to step back. A burst of static cracked through the speaker. Then a second camera feed opened. This one wasn't a security camera. It was handheld, moving. Someone walking through the terminal as the lens dipped between passengers. And then the voice came again. Calm, mocking, too close. "You wanted people, Jonathan? Let's talk about people." Jonathan stepped closer until he was inches from the screen. "What do you want from them?" the ghost laughed. Not loudly, but with a certainty that cut like a blade. "I want you to see what trust looks like when it dissolves. when your system, your precious architecture of checks and balances, cracks under real pressure. Evelyn slammed her palm onto the desk. Stop hiding behind riddles. If you want something, say it. The camera swiveled, suddenly focusing on a young baggage attendant rolling a cart across the floor. The image zoomed shaky but deliberate until the attendant's badge became readable. Michael Bowers, early 20s, nervous smile, ordinary. Jonathan's breath caught. He's not involved in anything. Leave him out of this. That depends, the ghost murmured. On you. Mendez pushed off the wall. This is a bluff. He hasn't done anything yet. But Jonathan wasn't sure. The ghost didn't bluff. He constructed inevitabilities. Another burst of static. Then a new screen filled with text-raw system code, scrolling faster than the eye could track. A digital intrusion. A test of perimeter defenses, not directed at the aviation network. Instead, at internal communications systems. He wasn't attacking the airport itself. He was attacking its people. Jonathan moved to the console, fingers gliding across the analog switches, attempting to isolate the intrusion. He's probing personnel channels, looking for vulnerabilities, like what Evelyn asked. Single authentication access points, areas where human error can override digital protocol. Mendez exhaled sharply. Translation: he's looking for someone he can manipulate. The ghost's voice crackled again. Very good, Sergeant. You finally speak the language. Jonathan's heartbeat quickened. What are you planning to do to them, oh Jonathan? You still think this is about doing? Sometimes watching is far more educational. The handheld camera feed, steadied and focused on a small security door near Gate 31. A door that should require dual authentication to unlock. A door controlled not by the aviation network, but by the older analog personnel system Jonathan himself had once helped design. Evelyn leaned forward. Is that door hot? Jonathan nodded slowly. If he cycles it wrong, it'll trigger a false breach alert. Mendez frowned. False breach? As in armed response? Jonathan finished. Every officer in this section would deploy. Evelyn's eyes widened. Into a crowded terminal, Jonathan swallowed. And that's exactly what he wants. Evelyn straightened. Can we override the door manually? No, Jonathan said. But we can stall it. Slow his access. He reached for the rotary switches again, redirecting the signal through a backup relay. The screen flickered as the door's indicator light shifted from amber to red. Evelyn exhaled. So we're safe. The ghost chuckled. Oh, Evelyn, you're mistaking delay for safety. He's still learning how you move, how you think. Suddenly the handheld camera spun, this time focusing on something new, a small girl, maybe 7 or 8, clutching a stuffed rabbit. Her parents stood beside her, distracted, arguing softly. The girl looked directly at the lens for half a second, unaware of its intent. That the ghost whispered is what the system should protect. But it doesn't. And you know why, Jonathan? Jonathan's throat tightened. Because the system relies on people. And people make choices. The voice sharpened. No. Because you trusted the wrong people. The feed cut. The room fell silent, the hum of machines the only heartbeat left. Evelyn broke the stillness first. He's escalating emotionally now. This isn't just a logic. He's trying to drag you into guilt. Jonathan stared at the blank screen. He's not dragging me anywhere. I've lived with that guilt longer than he knows. Mendez stepped toward the doorway. Then the only question left is where he's going next. Jonathan turned away from the console, his gaze shifting to the corridor beyond the open door. The air felt charged, like the airport itself was holding its breath. There's one place he'd go, Jonathan said slowly. if he wants to challenge the system's foundation. Where Evelyn asked, "The communications hub," Jonathan replied. "Not the digital one. The old analog switch room." Mendez nodded. "The one only you and a handful of engineers ever used." Jonathan met his eyes. "Exactly. And he knows I'm the only one alive who remembers the fail-safes." Evelyn's voice dropped. "So he's forcing you into a corner?" Jonathan shook his head. "No. He's forcing me into a mirror." They moved quickly through the maintenance wing, the air thick with heat and the metallic scent of aging infrastructure. Shadows stretched long across the floor. Pipes hissed overhead in sporadic bursts. The building felt alive now, caught between stability and collapse. As they approached the communications hub, a faint buzzing noise grew louder, like machinery humming under strain. Jonathan placed his hand on the old steel door, feeling the vibration through the metal. Memories surged forward. Late nights with code strewn across the floor. Debates with engineers who doubted the need for analog redundancy. The ghost, a younger man, then sharp-eyed and brilliant, arguing philosophy ethics and the inevitable flaws of human governance. Jonathan exhaled slowly. "Before we go in, you need to understand something." Evelyn stepped beside him. "Say it." "I didn't just build this system," Jonathan said quietly. "I built him." Mendez froze. "What the hell does that mean?" Jonathan's voice broke, but only slightly. "He was my protégé. And I ignored the warning signs because I thought brilliance could compensate for instability." Evelyn swallowed hard. And now Jonathan looked at the door with a calm that was colder than fear. "Now I take responsibility." He pushed the door open. The room inside glowed with soft amber light, console bulbs flickering like dying stars. Rows of analog panels lined the walls, each one humming with static and age. In the center of the room stood a single chair. A chair turned away from them. Jonathan took one step inside. The chair shifted. Evelyn raised her weapon. Mendez steadied himself. Jonathan whispered, "It's him." But when the chair finished turning, it wasn't the ghost sitting in it. It was the young baggage attendant from the camera feed, Michael Bowers, trembling, eyes wide with fear, hands bound, and taped to his chest a small analog trigger device, its red light pulsing softly like a heartbeat, counting down. Jonathan froze. Evelyn inhaled sharply. Mendez muttered a prayer. Behind them, the speaker crackled to life once more. "Round 2, Jonathan. This time you don't get to choose the system. This time you choose the person." Michael's breath came in short, panicked bursts, each exhale shaking the small trigger device taped to his chest. The red diode flashed in an uneven rhythm, casting a faint glow across his terrified face. Jonathan stepped closer, raising both hands, palms open, his voice low and steady despite the acid rising in his throat. "Michael, look at me," Jonathan said. "You're safe right now. No one is touching that device." Michael's eyes darted between them, unfocused, glossy with tears. He said not to move. He said it would." His voice cracked, dissolving into a sob he tried to swallow. Evelyn shifted her weight, taking in the room with sharp, measured glances. The analog panels hummed their soft whine, vibrating through the floor like a warning. Mendez rested one hand against the wall to steady himself, breathing through the pain buzzing along his nerves. None of them spoke for several seconds. No one dared. Then the ghost's voice hissed through the overhead speaker, each syllable slow, deliberate, meant to crawl under their skin. "Tell me, Jonathan, what is a system worth if it can't save the people inside it?" Jonathan clenched his jaw. You're not proving anything. You're terrorizing someone who doesn't even know what you're fighting. Exactly, the ghost replied. Because that's how real damage happens. Unseen, unexpected, undeserved. Evelyn stepped closer to Jonathan, voice barely above breath. We need to know whether that thing is live or staged. Jonathan nodded, eyes fixed on the device. It's a trigger, not a detonation unit. He pointed subtly at the wiring. The ghost wouldn't rely on explosives. Too messy, too binary. He wants control, not chaos. So what does it do? Mendez asked. Jonathan studied the wires looping into the analog relay box on the wall. It's connected to the fail-safe override sequence. If he triggers it, he'll redirect the emergency broadcast channels. The entire airport will receive his message, his narrative, his ideology. Evelyn stiffened. He's using the kid as a broadcast switch. Michael whimpered, shoulders shaking harder. Jonathan moved closer, crouching so he was eye level with him. Michael listened carefully. The device is real, but it only works if someone activates it. That someone is not going to be you. We're here. We're stopping this. The boy swallowed, gripping the armrests of the chair so tightly his knuckles went white. He said if anyone touched me, it would send the signal. Jonathan's gaze hardened. Then we don't touch you. Evelyn exhaled, her mind racing. We need to disconnect the relay from the other end. Jonathan stood slowly. Yes, but that requires reaching the core junction beneath the floor panels. Mendez blinked hard. Which one? Jonathan pointed to a metal grid in the corner of the room. There. The analog switchboard is directly under that panel. Evelyn stepped forward, knees bent, muscles steady. If I can sever the relay line, the trigger becomes useless. Jonathan placed a hand gently on her shoulder. Cut the wrong line, and it will send the broadcast prematurely. Evelyn held his stare. So guide me. A soft click echoed in the room. Not the speaker, not the device. Something else. Jonathan turned sharply. The monitors flickered each screen, shifting from static to grainy footage. Terminal entrances, security checkpoints, families waiting at baggage claim, elderly travelers resting on benches. The ghost wasn't just watching. He was showing them. You asked what this is about, the voice said. Here's your answer. These people aren't passengers. They're variables. Data points in a system you swore could protect them. Jonathan felt something cold settle inside him. You don't get to use them to justify your spiral. My spiral. The ghost laughed softly, bitterly. You taught me the math, Jonathan. If a system has a flaw, the flaw scales, exponentially, until collapse is unavoidable. Evelyn knelt by the floor panel. Tell me which bolts to remove. Jonathan snapped into focus, dropping beside her, counterclockwise on the corner fasteners. Slowly. Don't jostle the housing. Mendez moved closer to Michael, keeping his voice low. Kid, you're doing great. Just breathe. Don't look at the screens. Michael shook harder. I can hear him. In my head. He said I was chosen because no one would question me. Because no one sees us. Tears ran down his cheeks. I didn't do anything. Jonathan looked at him, a single flash of pain crossing his features. I know, he said softly. And that's exactly why he picked you. Evelyn lifted the panel halfway. Beneath it lay a maze of wiring, dense, intricate color, coded only in the way older systems were, inconsistently. Jonathan traced the lines with his finger, sorting logic paths from redundant loops. There, he whispered, the red-black braid. That's the relay lead. Evelyn set her jaw. If I cut it, cut only the outer sheath, Jonathan said. Expose the wire. Don't sever. And then Jonathan reached for a grounding clip. We short the signal manually. Force it to die before it leaves this room." Mendez grimaced. "You're telling me we're going to recreate what almost cooked me alive?" Jonathan shook his head. "This is low voltage, but high consequence." Evelyn slid the blade under the braid, slow, precise. Fibers split cleanly, revealing the copper beneath. Jonathan attached the grounding clip hands, steady despite the heat and tension vibrating through the metal. "Ready?" he asked quietly. Evelyn nodded once. Jonathan pressed the clip to the exposed wire. A burst of light sparked, small but sharp enough to make Michael flinch. The monitors flickered violently, screens momentarily going black. Then the speaker crackled in irritation. "That wasn't yours to touch." Jonathan straightened, chest rising with controlled breath. "Neither is the boy." The ghost's voice sharpened. "You think you saved him? You redirected a wire." "I redirect people." Static filled the room again, rising like a storm. The handheld feed returned this time, showing someone approaching the emergency exit corridor. Someone Jonathan recognized. His stomach dropped. "Lena," he whispered. His former colleague, the one person besides him who still knew the deepest architecture of the analog failsafes, the woman whose silence over the last 2 years he had mistaken for grief. But now her face told another story, a grim determination, a weight of regret riding her shoulders as she walked toward a place she had no reason to be. The ghost spoke with quiet satisfaction. "She came on her own. She always did understand me better than you." Evelyn looked between the screens and Jonathan. "Who is she to him?" Jonathan's voice was a rasp, his tether to sanity, and the last person who might help him justify this. Mendez's eyes widened. Or the last person he can use. The speaker went silent, so silent it felt intentional. Jonathan stepped back from the console, breath shallow. "He's shifting the board. He's moving pieces we didn't even see." Evelyn rose, blade still in hand. "Then we move faster." Jonathan met her eyes. "No. Now we move differently." He turned toward the exit shoulders, set face hardening, with a resolve the ghost had once admired in him. "He's not trying to collapse the system," Jonathan said quietly. "He's trying to rewrite it." And Jonathan Reed, the man who once built the architecture the entire airport relied on, now had to confront the one person who understood its shadows as well as he did. The room went still. The war had just changed shape. Jonathan stepped into the service hallway, with a stillness that felt carved from stone, the weight of the airport, the system, the past all compressing around him with suffocating familiarity. The walls hummed with aging circuitry, each vibration echoing down the long corridor like a distant warning. Evelyn moved at his left blade, still in hand, silent but coiled the tension in her spine, a mirror of the tension in her breath. Mendez followed behind, slower than before, steadying himself with one hand on the wall, refusing to fall behind, even as pain flickered across his face. At the far end of the hallway, Lena Drake stood beneath a flickering bulb, her slim figure half-painted in shadow. Her hair, once a neat cascade of waves, now hung loose around her shoulders. Her clothes were ordinary, nondescript nothing of the brilliant engineer she'd once been. But her eyes, when she lifted them to Jonathan, still held the precise surgical intensity he remembered. "Jonathan," she said softly, like a greeting wrapped in both memory and regret. Jonathan didn't slow. "Where is he?" A faint smile touched her lips. Not warmth, not cruelty, something quieter. "Close enough to hear you. Far enough that you can't follow." Evelyn stepped forward. "You're helping him." Lena didn't look at her. "I'm helping the part of him that believes you can still understand why he's doing this." Jonathan stopped 3 feet away, the air between them thick. This isn't a debate, Lena. He's using a child to force a broadcast. He's manipulating the personnel system. He's escalating. Lena's jaw tightened. He's escalating because you never listened when it mattered. Jonathan took a slow breath, forcing control back into his voice. What does he want from me? From all of this. Lena stepped closer, lowering her voice. Validation, acknowledgement, proof that the system you built is flawed, not because of its architecture, but because of its architect. The words landed like ice in Jonathan's chest. He knew this argument. He'd lived it years before, when the ghost had been nothing more than an idealist with sharper edges than most. Back then, Jonathan had called it brilliance. Now he could see the fracture lines he had ignored. He shook his head. I don't care what justification he hides behind. He crossed a line today. Lena's eyes flashed with pain. He crossed that line the day you cut him out. Evelyn stepped beside Jonathan, voice steady. You don't get to rewrite the story. Lena shifted her gaze to Evelyn, studying her for a long moment. You're new to his world. You still believe it was built cleanly. Jonathan stepped forward, his voice rising. Enough. Take me to him. For the first time, Lena looked away. I can't. You can, Jonathan said. You just haven't decided which side you're on. Lena's breath faltered, a tremor passing through her lips. For a moment, she seemed human again, torn, trapped, exhausted by the weight of her own loyalties. It's not that simple, she whispered. Jonathan's expression hardened. It was simple the moment he put a device on that kid. Lena closed her eyes. When she opened them, something resolved inside her. Not defiance, not surrender. Something closer to inevitability. He's in the auxiliary relay room, she said quietly. He's preparing a second phase. It's not what you think. Jonathan absorbed the words, reading the shift in her posture, the tiny tremor in her jaw. She wasn't lying, but she wasn't telling everything. She was buying him time, not betraying the ghost. Evelyn reached for her cuffs. Lena raised her hands, palms open. I won't resist. Mendez stepped forward to secure her wrists, his movements careful, deliberate. Lena didn't flinch. Jonathan didn't look at her again. Stay with her, he told Mendez. Evelyn stepped beside him. We go in together. They moved deeper into the building, leaving Lena in the dim hallway, her silhouette trembling in the flickering light. The auxiliary relay room sat behind a thick metal door at the end of a descending stairwell. As they approached, the hum of active circuitry grew louder, pulsing like a warning pulse beneath their feet. Jonathan pushed the door open. The room inside glowed with a deep amber washlight, spilling from old analog consoles wired into a lattice of newer diagnostics, and standing at the center of it, facing the largest panel hands, moving with swift, precise elegance, was the ghost. Not a voice, not a shadow, not a flicker on a screen. A man, young but exhausted, brilliant but fractured, his posture a perfect combination of confidence and desperation. He spoke without turning. I thought you'd take longer. Jonathan stepped inside. You left a trail. That's not like you. The ghost Elias Ward finally turned. His eyes were sharp, clear, alive with something dangerous and heartbreakingly familiar. I left a trail, Elias said, because I wanted you to follow it. Evelyn lifted her weapon. Elias didn't move. Jonathan stepped forward. End this, Elias. No more tests, no more variables. Elias's mouth curved into a faint smile. But this is the only way you'll understand. Jonathan stopped a few feet away, their eyes locking in an unspoken history. Mentor and protege, builder and saboteur. names that meant nothing compared to the truth beneath them. "You keep talking about understanding," Jonathan said quietly. "Then explain it. Here. Now." Elias looked down at his hands, flexing them slowly, as though struggling to hold something steady. The system was never meant to protect people. It was meant to protect itself. And when I saw that, I realized the only way to prove it was to force it to confront what it refuses to acknowledge. Jonathan's voice softened with something raw. "Elias, you're not proving anything. You're drowning in a belief that the world betrayed you, so you want to betray it back." Elias's eyes lifted sharply. Pain flared across his features. "You don't get to say my name like that. Not after what you did." Jonathan's breath hitched. "I tried to save you." "No," Elias whispered. "You tried to fix me. That's not the same." Evelyn stepped closer. "Elias, whatever you think you're fighting, this isn't the way." Elias raised one hand, not aggressively, but in a quiet plea for space. "I'm not hurting anyone. I'm revealing truth." Jonathan followed his gaze to the panel behind him. A message primed. Not destructive, not catastrophic, but incendiary. A broadcast designed to expose flaws, to incite panic, to erode public trust in the system Jonathan had helped build. "You think fear builds change?" Jonathan asked. Elias's voice broke. "I think fear wakes people up." Jonathan stepped closer. "And I think you're tired, Elias. Tired of carrying pain you never let anyone see." Elias's hands trembled, just barely. "But enough," Don't he whispered. "Don't make me choose." "You already have," Jonathan said. "You came here instead of vanishing. You left Lena signs. You wanted someone to stop you." Elias closed his eyes. The room hummed louder. Evelyn stepped forward, slowly lowering her weapon. "Elias, look at me." He did. "Let the boy go," she said softly. "Let the message die. Let yourself breathe." For a moment, an entire life hovered between two choices. Then Elias stepped aside. Jonathan surged forward, killing the relay with one clean motion. The consoles dimmed. The hum died. The message dissolved into static. Elias's knees buckled. Jonathan caught him before he fell. Elias pressed his forehead to Jonathan's shoulder, voice shattered. "I didn't know how else to make you see." Jonathan held him steady. "You didn't need to burn the world to be heard." When they brought him upstairs, Lena was waiting. The moment her eyes met Elias's, something inside her collapsed. She leaned against the wall, breathing hard, tears slipping down her cheeks. Elias looked away, ashamed. Mendez guided him gently toward the security team. Not forcibly. Not as a criminal, but as someone who needed help more than punishment. Jonathan stepped back, watching the scene unfold with a heaviness that felt both inevitable and strangely hopeful. Evelyn touched his arm. It could have ended much worse. Jonathan nodded, the truth vibrating in his bones. It didn't. And that has to mean something. Evelyn offered a small, tired smile. "So what now?" Jonathan looked out over the terminal through the service window. People were still moving, still walking, still living unaware of how close they had come to fear. Now, he said, we rebuild. And if you believe stories like this matter, if you want more tales of courage and redemption, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment 3 words: protect the truth.